It's been 2 months since the release of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and I think it would be fair to say that when that game launched, it was a bit of a hot mess. However, in the weeks that have followed, the game's developers over at Respawn have released numerous patches for bug fixes, stability, and performance. Patch 6 is the latest to be released in the ever-increasing line of patches, and according to the release notes, Respawn aren't finished yet. More is on the way, which on one hand is kind of tragic, but also on the other, it's encouraging to see that they are still working hard behind the scenes and that EA haven't dropped this game like a bad habit at the first sign of trouble. Now, I did play the game at launch, and although there were issues across the board, my platform of choice is PC, and I think it's fair to say that most of the issues plaguing the game were mainly centered around the PC release. Terrible frame rates, poor GPU and CPU optimization, graphical and audio glitches, game-breaking bugs. This is not an exhaustive list, but it was enough to turn me off and wait for the inevitable fixes that followed. Well, I think I've waited long enough. So the question is simple. Is Star Wars Jedi Survivor now fixed? And the answer, in short, is yes and no. You see, at its core, Jedi Survivor is actually a very good video game. The methodical Souls-like combat is challenging and satisfying. The inclusion of range attacks with the blaster adds some nice variation when taking down the bad guys. It builds upon the foundation that Fallen Order had already laid down. There are different skill trees and perks to unlock as you progress, a plethora of different customization options to choose from, ranging from colour schemes and alternative cosmetics for BD1 to Cal's hairstyles, attire and lightsaber appearance. None of these cosmetic options are hidden behind microtransactions, which is ironic, seeing as they are housed inside a loot box style container. Now, I must say that this is a breath of fresh air. It's become the norm in modern gaming to shoehorn a loot box style system into single and multiplayer games alike. What's even more surprising is the main pusher of these aggressive microtransactions are Electronic Arts, the bloody publisher of this game. So the fact that as a player I can unlock these items through exploration and general gameplay deserves a mention, and praise should be given when it's due. The bedrock on which this game was built is undoubtedly a solid one. The semi-open worlds are handcrafted for you to explore. They are huge in comparison to the linear level design of Fallen Order. They have a God of War feel to them, with additional side objectives to complete from various NPCs that yield rewards upon completion. There are puzzles to solve, secrets to find, characters new and old to meet, interact or reconnect with. The game has the look and feel of a well-written Star Wars story that ticks nearly every box. Nearly. But then the performance issues rears its ugly head once more. The game undoubtedly runs better when compared to its launch, but not by much. Previously, I struggled to hit and maintain a steady 60 frames per second. The game would dip below 40 frames per second and stay there, even when cycling the graphical presets from epic to low. In order to reset the frame rate, I'd have to quit the game back to its title menu and reload the last save file. The bare minimum a game should be achieving in the modern era of gaming is a steady 60 FPS, and post-patch I can now hit that benchmark, with it holding steady most of the time, albeit not all of the time. For context, this is at 1440p with the epic graphic preset, RTX off and the AMD fidelity set to balanced. Most of the time I capped the frame rate at 60 using the Nvidia control panel, and for my rig at least I found these settings to be ideal in order to have a smooth-ish overall experience. This doesn't mean to say that the performance issues have been ironed out, far from it actually. The difference between switching from epic to low graphic preset is still minimal, and although the changes are easy to visually see on screen, the frame rate is still prone to stutter and occasional dips. There is still a long way to go, and as previously mentioned, more patches are on the way. But if I'm being honest, the improvements that have already been made are, well, quite frankly, underwhelming. And when ray tracing enters the chat, performance suffers even further. Despite it being better, again when compared to launch, it's clear more work is needed to optimise the game's ray tracing abilities. Most of the improvements made over the various patches post-launch have been focused on the non-ray tracing side of things, and it shows. When playtesting on a 3080 Ti, the frame rate would still drop below 50 and sometimes into the mid-40s, which is just unacceptable for a AAA release. The microstutter is still hanging around like a bad smell and is especially prevalent with RTX on, although with RTX off it's still extremely noticeable. I really did think that after all of these patches, these issues would have been smoothed out by now, and frankly it's shocking that they are still present and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. For some people, I can see this being a turn-off. If you're wanting to dial everything up to max, then sadly with the RTX on, you're still going to be disappointed and may want to wait for future patches, which could be weeks if not months away. But if you're like me and have waited long enough, now might be a good time to jump back into Cal's story. Failing that, those of you with a Star Wars itch could always go back and play Fallen Order. When that game launched, it did so without issue, and if memory serves, ran smooth as silk on old and new systems alike. I honestly don't know how Respawn messed this up so badly. With that in mind, the game is in a playable state, don't get me wrong, it's not at Cyberpunk levels of broken, and despite the issues still present, the microstutter and the occasional graphical glitch, it's not affected my overall enjoyment of the game, and ultimately that's what's important here, because a game first and foremost has to be fun above all else. More polish is definitely needed, but for now I'm looking forward to progressing through the campaign, which has mostly remained spoiler-free, despite YouTube's best efforts. So let me know what you think about the current state of the game in the comments. Do you feel now is a good time to jump in or back in, or are you still holding out for future improvements? Until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.